that was pretty good. I'm working on it, you guys. The intro is almost perfectly smooth. Next episode, it's going to blow your mind. Welcome back to another gathering of the Fractional Forum, folks. I'm really excited to be back. I was sick last week, and I'm excited to be back. As you might see, we are a couple of fractionals short today. People have important meetings to go to. Shocking, right? I know. It's a fractional people actually have jobs that we do. Okay, so if you're commonly watch the show, you might notice that we do not have our sales representative nor our CFO representative. So if you are watching and you happen to fall into one of those categories, we would really love to hear your voice as part of the conversation today, because we have a topic that's maybe a little bit controversial. And honestly, I feel like sales and financial people have a big part in the conversation. So we'd really like to hear your voices. We're talking about this concept of, I'm going to let Keith take credit for coming up with this, because he did actually come up with this, about banning revenue goals when we're doing goal setting, because I think, and Keith, you can explain it a little bit more, but I think it's because a lot of times we like set a revenue goal and kind of like, okay, we set a goal, opt out, go do tactical stuff. So do you want to add a little bit of framing to that and kick off the conversation for today?
Sure. So hopefully I don't start off on a too feisty of a foot here on the revenue goal side of things. But we were talking together, and one of the big statements that I made was, I feel like revenue goals are the goals that you make sometimes when you don't know what other goals to make. And so I recognize that if you are publicly traded, if you're a large enterprise, obviously you have to do your forecasting and everything like that. But especially, if you're a growing organization, and you say you're a $3 million organization, and you get your entire senior leadership team together, and you set a goal for $5 million because you're not quite sure what else to do, but you feel like you should grow. I feel like that's a tiny bit of a cop-out. And
I heard some shoulds in there, which are always a red flag for me, because I feel like when we're like, I should set a revenue goal.
Yeah.
Says who?
Yeah.
Was it you, or was it someone that's external to you? Probably it might have been a book you read. It might have been a podcast you listened to. It could have been a lot of things. But when the word should comes up, I don't know how the rest of you feel about this, but it's almost always an external force and not actually coming from inside.
Yeah, what I love about goals, so just to put it back to goal, take the revenue out of it. What I love about goals is it helps you focus and helps bring alignment to a team to focus on something. Which is really great. So we talk about, you brought up external things. Often when we're lacking focus and clarity, there is a lot, we are very distracted. So where is that goal coming from? I think is important. Like Keith said, it's like, well, I should do this because I'm, with my other CEO, industry peers, and this is what everyone else is doing. However, and I mean, it's interesting we're having this conversation with the salesperson here, because the salesperson, their goals often start at that top line revenue goal. And marketing too, I think as well, Tracy, sort of, but it's because it's the top of the stream, right? Where it starts. What I like about it, what I can say positive about the revenue goal is it starts the conversation. So if it does nothing else, it's like, we're a $3 million company and we want to be 5. It's like, why? Like, why? You definitely want a why. You want a purpose when things get tough. You definitely want to recalibrate back to something like a BHAG or a core purpose of a company, a mission. But then we have to break down the hows of how to do that. Maybe not right into tactical, but there definitely needs to be a strategy conversation. So sometimes that big revenue thing is just the entry point. It's just, it can't be the only thing. It's like, let's put it out there and walk away. And that, I think that's kind of like both Tracy and Keith have had some experience with that, where it is like, let's do this, and then I'm going to just vacate the conversation, or we're adjourned. Like, we're not having a discussion. So
let's just go from a $3 million company to a $15 million company next year.
Yeah.
Let's do it, everybody.
We're all aligned now. We're all aligned. We have one singular goal. Our
Yeah.
purpose. And I think that's the other piece too around purpose, is that revenue doesn't, like, if you're an organization that is, that you have the customer at the center of everything, and your whole reason for being an organization is, you have the customer at the middle. Everything you do, all your conversation, all your documentation, all your literature is all about the customer. And then your only connecting goal is all about you and your revenue. Something. And so I think that it can be an easy trap to fall into, and I could probably stand on a soapbox and talk about this for a while, but it can be a little bit of a trap. And I think that what becomes more productive is, like, I think to your point, Lindsay, what are the things that lead to that revenue? What are the conversations that unlock?
I'm going to actually go back to what we talked about when we talked about goal setting, and that reflection point that needs to happen first, because revenue is just an outcome of all the things, right? It's that building point. Like, if you build it, they will come. All the revenue, all the things that you want in your organization, right? So just really taking that step back to, okay, what is our purpose? And let's say, things are going well, your revenue is increasing over time, and you're thinking, okay, I want to stretch it. I can probably double it this year, but why? Like, you got here from being really aligned in your purpose, from having all the mechanisms, driving well, and all the cylinders firing together. That state worked really well. And so what can you refine? What can you, leverage that's working really well? That's the goal. And the rest of it will come. So it's just an outcome. It's not a goal.
Yeah.
Is my argument.
I feel like it creates some fun conversations too. Like, and to kind of build on what you and Lindsay both said, it's a fun imagination tactic where you say, okay, well, what does the world look like if we do go from that $1 million? Let's fast forward, and what are the things that need to be true if we are a $5 million, $6 million, $100 billion company? And they need to be true or different, and I think can really influence your goals, where you say, okay, our finance team needs to be doing this, our technical team needs to be doing this, but it's more of that spark that inspires the goals, in my opinion, rather than the end all be all.
I think the other thing that could be really powerful is because I just experienced this in the last two days doing a goal setting exercise with a company, and at the beginning of the goal setting, we spoke about, and just to be clear, like, there was the big revenue goal that was already set like a month ago. So this was like the actual breakdown of the work. And that revenue goal has now changed as a result of all the conversation. But one thing that we had the benefit of was that we worked here, and we had the core purpose on the wall. We also re-looked back at core values and recalibrate that, because there was a lot of, we'll just call it lack of alignment around the core values that was really never fully figured out. And so when we were talking about, like, Keith, what you said, imagining it, trying to get there. So what does it mean? So me as the operational person, I right away have to look at resources, capacity, people, strategy, talent. That's where Vered and I would break out and have these conversations of what we could do to start to look at a way to achieve that, because top line revenue is only bringing it in, but you still have to have the, potentially the resources, capacity in place to realize that those revenues. But what was really powerful was one of the focal areas, or the conversations previous to that, was about quality. Right, like quality, and you talked about customer. I was trying to think of a way to say this without using the word should, but the customer is always needs to be part of the conversation. We all start a business to solve a problem for that customer. You have to fall in love with the customer's problem, not your solution. So if I'm thinking quality and I'm thinking customer, now does doubling the size of my top line revenue or company revenue for 2025, is that going to continue to fulfill that customer and that quality or excellence or whatever it is? So having that as your like calibration or filter in the conversation is really, really powerful.
Can we also talk about profit? Because I think a lot of time we talk about revenue goals, but like I spent quite a bit of time working in client success. And I remember at one point doing an audit on all of the clients and realizing the profitability of each of those clients. And one client in particular, every single time, so it's a marketing company, right? So we run ongoing campaigns for these types of clients. Every single time we ran when we lost money. Every single time. So from a revenue perspective, and this company, they were like very gung-ho about running campaigns because we're giving them not a slamming deal. They're not making money on it. So like we could have, from a revenue perspective, increased the number of campaigns that we served to that client. And in so doing, we would not grow the business because we lose money every time we ran that client. And I remember looking at that and just being like, I actually ended up going back to the campaign manager and I'm like, you have to figure out how to do a project for this client in 4 hours. Otherwise, we have to start charging them more money. And she figured out how to do it. So like, good for her. Your teams are smart. Figure out things. But if we're not looking at the holistic picture, we're just looking at a revenue number. And again, especially if it's a big one, like if you're doubling your size of like the one I was talking, like literally that was true. We wanted to go from a $3 million company to a $15 million company in 12 months. That is gigantic, right? What are the other contributing factor numbers that we want to talk about in that? Because if we're going to do that, and if we're going to maintain our profitability or improve our profitability, how do we do that? Because it's not now just a matter of like duplicate this a whole bunch of times with the same resources that we have and we have to hire a bunch of people. That's actually not going to work to deliver that number. So I always think that if we're going to talk about revenue, we should also be talking about profitability.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I'll try to channel my inner Carolyn here. And like, not all revenue is good revenue, right? And I agree with what you're saying. Where I've seen some organizations so focused on that top line growth that they'll do these deals and they'll bring on these customers that is quite literally bad revenue. And it's bad for the teams. It's bad for the bottom line. Potentially their customers that aren't a fit, but in that pursuit of, okay, well, we just need to grow, you start to do some pretty unnatural things.
And I would say, actually, I'd love to get your thought on this too, Keith, from a tech perspective, because I feel like for a lot of tech companies, especially early in their growth, are like users, right? We just need all the users, whoever will use it.
Yeah.
But then there's also a cost, there's like server costs to fulfill that. And like, if your costs structure can't handle that, then actually getting more quote unquote revenue could put you out of business faster. So yeah.
100%. And I think, I just did a podcast episode with an individual talking about cash flow. And, they run a cash flow SaaS platform. And what we talked about was just how some of those technology costs, especially when you're on either kind of a linear user usage basis, if not managed properly and managed in line with some of your actual other company objectives, can balloon in incredibly quick ways. And can, all of a sudden you wake up and the $6 per month invoice is $6,000 a month. And what seemed like a really good idea at the time just starts to eat away at the kind of the fundamentals of that business. And I, even in terms of some of that cash flow, and I feel like this is a whole other episode in itself. But some of these startup valuations just force, they inject a whole bunch of cash. and then just force this unnatural user growth that aren't necessarily sustainable business models, but they're all just trying to get as much attention as possible in very unnatural, inorganic ways that can cause the business to do some really weird things. But that's a whole other episode. I feel like we need to unpack that in a very different way.
But I think you bring up a really good point around how it could be a distraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, these lofty revenue goals distract from your purpose. And then that trickle down effect to now you're impacting your people, and you're diverting your business in a completely different direction, because then you're just chasing the dollars rather than the real purpose of why you started your organization. And really, like, that purpose, again, we've talked about this many, many times, is for your people to do the work that they need to do with the value system that you created, whether it be providing the best customer service, quality, whatever you're grounded in. And so you're essentially going to run your organization into the ground potentially, because you're completely diverting from the core purpose.
Yeah.
And often people, I hear it all the time. I read it all the time where okay, so you start a company because you want freedom. So everyone finds out that's not actually the case. And then the other thing is, when you grow, like revenue, you're going to be more profitable. And that's also quite often not the case, not in the short term anyways. When you talked about the users and the artificial growth on that, Keith, the very engineered growth about, buying all these users, or, really kind of controlling the stream into the company without it being an intentional way. Because at the end of the day, if we talk, and I'm gonna play sales and pretend I'm Tim today, but the acquisition cost of a customer. So you want to create users or customers or clients that are profitable for your company in a way that they're value aligned, and you're able to deliver to that customer in a profitable and meaningful way. It's fulfilling the customer, fulfilling for your employees or your teams. And then on the other side of it, you want them to be out there talking about what you have, what they experience by working with your company, the services you provide. Ideally, that if you grow in a more meaningful way, and you're attracting those type of individuals that you can truly add value to, not just have like a false leader of like you talked about with users, you can truly add value, then those customers and clients will start to build out your referral programs, your promoters, things like that, so that you're not working so hard in order to keep your lifetime value of customers are going to be quite a bit bigger. So I don't know, just throwing that out there, like it needs to be done in a meaningful way for everyone involved.
Well, and I think, brand is kind of my thing, like authentic brands. But these are the thing that's even interesting for me on this is one of the things you said at the beginning really resonated with me, Lindsay. And like, when you don't know your purpose, you don't have that clarity, there is a lot of stuff out there to like fill our brains with things. And this is where the overwhelm comes from. This is also where like hopping strategies, like if you feel like hopping strategies is a symptom in your business, then this is like, what is that rooted in? You're just jumping around to things that are available. This is why you're jumping around, because you don't know why you are. And so when I think about it, like one of the things, businesses, growth is great, right? We don't want to be decreasing probably, because we minimally want to keep employed the people that we have employed. But what is growth to you, right? Like based on your purpose, based on your why, based on who you are as a person, what does it mean to meaningfully grow? Because if you have a very good foundation for you, and maybe it's tied to customers, maybe it's tied to quality, like it could be tied. I'm all about authenticity, right? So for me, I remember, actually, I'll use this as an example, because I remember I do these in-person networking events. And a couple Decembers ago, there was like 28 people at one. And I was like, oh, like this is too many people. Like for what I was trying to do, that was too many people. And that was
But
my
was there
experience.
a moment, Tracy? Was there a moment, even for a second, maybe before you even showed up, that you had this, maybe this is what success is going to be, right? Like,
Well, that is what the world would tell me.
mhm,
Selling out your event is what you want, right?
Mhm.
And like I based the event on the capacity of the location. So I was like, okay, like that is sellout. And I was at it and I was like, no, because this event is supposed to be about making meaningful connections. And now there's too many people here to make meaningful connections. So now the size of the event doesn't deliver on what the event is supposed to do. And I remember like my husband saying to me, who works in a completely different industry, you're going to have to find a bigger space for your events. And I was like, no, because that might be different. There might be a different event for that, right? And like maybe my brand is attracting people, that is good. And we can service that in a different way. But this event is about creating meaningful connection. This is how I create meaningful connection. It's not that that's the right or wrong way. That's how I do it. And so if I'm doing it at an event, this is the way it has to be. It has to be 20 people or less. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And even recently, like I'm doing a lunch next Wednesday, and I had to message Lindsay because I'm like, there's 10 spots and there's 19 people RSVP'd. That's not going to work. We're going to figure it out. But like, how would you grow? And I don't think enough businesses spend enough time in that part of the conversation to understand how to set additional potentially revenue goals off of that foundation.
Well, and I think before we move off of that as well, like one thing that I just want to build on, and I love what you said, is the idea of velocity, and patience. Because I think that everyone right now is in such a hurry to get from A to B that they do weird things to get there, right? And I think that maybe that's where some of the challenges, maybe where some of that frustration with revenue goals came. Like I don't see anyone setting revenue goals. It's like, you know what, we did $1 million last year. This year I'm really hoping for like 1.15. It seems to be in, you know, these huge leaps forward that maybe create some of the frustration there. But I think that if people grow at reasonable rates in line with their customers, their values, those things, like no one wants to do that. Everyone wants the success story that goes from like 1 million to 10 million to 200 million, and all of a sudden in their 5th year of business they're a unicorn. No one wants that kind of slow, steady growth that I think that actually can create some really meaningful stuff. And I realize that this is a little bit of a direction turn here, but like, what's your perspective on that idea of patience? Do you see it as a challenge, a benefit? What do you guys all think?
I see it as a virtue.
Okay.
I think you're onto something because it's sustainable in the way that you've just described, where you have patience because you're building the blocks to be able to sustain that. I've seen tons of organizations that have scaled really rapidly, and it's very hard to be grounded in the success factors that have supported you along the way to get there when you are scaling that rapidly. Like things fall apart, you don't have the processes developed, you forget about your value system because you just need to hire people, and you kind of let all those things go. And so it ends up being kind of like this bounce that happens because it's chaotic growth. It's not sustainable growth.
And I've seen it, like, especially when companies that get funding. There's nothing wrong with funding. Like, I don't want to create a war with anyone providing funding to organizations, but I've seen it so many times where an organization kind of has this set of values. They have their growth pattern. They're kind of doing it over and over again. They're on a really good cadence. They get this injection of cash to try and do things faster, and they kind of lose what made them special in the first place. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I've seen and heard that story so many times where, when growth at the end of the day becomes the ultimate goal, and like usually that's in the form of some sort of revenue, that it creates organizations to do unnatural things to get there.
We have a really good question.
Yes.
That Margaret Glover. brought to
Let's
us.
learn about companies that focus solely on revenue as their primary goal. Do you have any examples? We may or may not specifically reference company names.
Well, in the financial services industry, investment organizations or companies, absolutely, that is part of their mandate, right? They're focused on revenue goals. Like that's
when shareholders, things like that,
yeah,
it's often part of it. But I think what is the pain point for you, Keith? Because this was like your your problem to solve, and I don't completely know the backstory behind it. However, it's that one and done thing, is it not? It's like to just have that revenue goal and walk away, without doing the time to investigate into the intention behind it, the impact it's going to have. Is it aligned with the overall strategy of the company, values, purpose? Yeah, like that is to me the broken part of this, is that just that revenue goal, and that's it, and that's enough. But as we know, with anything, it's never enough, right? You can't just like set the intention of a project and not break it down into steps of like, how are we going to get there?
Well, and that's one of the things I was going to say, is that a lot of times we'll set a like annual revenue goal and we'll get to the end of the first quarter and not be tracking on target, but we don't adjust anything, right? So like we just keep hoping, and I wish Tim was here to comment on this from sales perspective. We just keep hoping that 100% of these sales revenue targets are going to close on December 31st. This is not, no, all of these things are a process. From a marketing and sales perspective, things are a funnel, right? If I don't have stuff, I remember, so I'll use the example that I'm familiar with, Margaret, which is like the company I was working for. We were trying to like 5 times growth in 1 year. The strategy, I'm using air quotes for those of you who are just listening, was that we'll sign 7 whale clients this year. So this is a software company. What we also know is that the 1 whale client that we have took us 2 years to close.
That's that reflection part, right?
Right. And so then I was like, okay, well, like which of these whale clients do we have in the funnel today? Because from a marketing perspective, like I can hit an ABM strategy, right? Like and target a whole bunch of marketing resources just on these businesses. Like this is possible. Oh, we don't have any in the funnel. Okay, but they're only like it takes them. Oh, look, who's here? It's Tim. Ha! Hi, Tim.
Whoa!
Just in time. Well, we missed you the whole time. But
we're talking about funnels, Tim. Funnels.
I actually.
So we're talking about the concept of like only revenue goals, but then like not kind of breaking that down. So if I want to close 7 whales and I know that it takes a whale 2 years to close and I don't have any in my funnel, then I'm probably not closing 7 whales this year. Or maybe there's like something supremely drastic I could do on the sales side to make that happen. But then it's like, it's not business as usual. So if we get to Q1 and we've done business as usual and we're not tracking on our targets, then what? Then what's the conversation? And in my experience, the conversation doesn't change.
And that's an important concept on what are you chasing, right? And who are you chasing it with? Because if you want to land 7 whales and you're starting a junior salesperson, that's unrealistic, right? If it's going to take 2 years to land some of these, that first year with your salesperson, you're focused on funnel development, not on necessarily landing the whales. But you also got to pay for their way and do it. So it's going to be a combination of both. We want you to sell this, which might not be the target we need you to have once you're fully up to speed, but your initial 3 months, 6 months, 1 year might be a smaller goal, but we want to see that your funnel is developing. And if you have a junior salesperson, you might even go deeper into their activities to say, I need you to make X phone calls. I need you to do this because I'm guiding them along the way. So It depends a little bit on your sales cycle and the experience and caliber of the people that you have in that position.
So we have Aaron who commented, and I just want to chime in on what Aaron was saying here. We sort of touched that the how is important. So I would say if it took 2 years to convert that initial whale, in order to do 7 new in 1 year, whether you have a senior salesperson or a junior salesperson, I know that adds another layer of complexity, but what are you going to do different? That's what I would challenge, right? Like what exactly is going to be done different? And
that was my question. How will we? This sounds exciting. How will we do that?
And then once you get your 7 whales, likely you don't have the team that can deliver on the services or the products to fulfill those 7 whales, because, unless you're a very cash flow rich and profitable company, you don't have employees sitting around waiting for the order to cross their desk. You have to look at a scaling plan, an optimization plan before you scale. Ideally, that's always, make sure that everything is running at a very optimal rate, working together, utilizing technology.
Sorry, I didn't know that was going to happen.
Oh, that's good. Anyways, I was just finishing off, but yes, that was the point.
I don't know how to get rid of it now.
How are we going to get it? And then my white face moment is always that, how are we going to deliver? Because you're going to lose your 7 whales very, very quickly, and the potential of 14 more whales with all of the detractors in the conversation by the fact you can't deliver on it. So both things need to be considered.
I had a similar conversation with someone in an industry that they're literally chasing 7 whales. They do not have the capacity if they win them all. They just can't do it. But you're challenged in that I can't stop chasing all 7, because which ones will fall off, which ones will delay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where sales funnels and communication between sales and ops is so critical, is so that you can say, this is what we're predicting, this is what our win rate is, this is what we expect. But those other things are in there too. And so having a little bit of an idea that there's this wave, that tsunami that's going to come, at least you can kind of go, well, what if, right? And you can be aware of those signals, rather than having the sales guy coming in one day and ringing the bell 7 times and sales ops goes, what just happened here? Where'd the tsunami come from?
And then again, we might be like, yay, we reached the revenue goal. But if, as Keith mentioned earlier, we're all about clients and delivery or quality. And now I'm just going to break my brand by trying to serve all of those people. Yay. Okay. That image that I pulled up, because I was just curious when we were talking about everyone thinks you need to double revenue year over year. And I was like, okay, well, most people would consider Apple a pretty successful company. What was their revenue growth early in their days? You guys, I'm going to share it again. I want you guys to see how flat it is. Look how flat it is. flat.
And Apple is one of the most focused companies in the world. I read an article just comparing them to Motorola with cell phones, and the fact that when Motorola or BlackBerry, even, I can't remember what they compared them to, but when they had to do an update, the fact that they had so many different models to work through, the complexity of that, and considering all their different users depending on all the different models, whereas Apple, it's one phone. So very focused company.
I mean, but the point I wanted to make with that graph is that they didn't early on in their days, they didn't have double growth year over year, right? This is not, and Now they're $1 trillion company. And so if that's kind of the thing, I think it speaks very well to what Baron was referencing earlier. Like, how do you build this for sustainability, right? Like, if you want like you can go big and you can go bust very fast. But if you want this business to outlive you, like, especially if you want it to be legacy, like, some of the other companies that are now $1 trillion companies, this is what it looked like. So it's not bad or wrong for yours to look like that too, if there's a reason that you have behind that. Yeah, I thought it was a good visual to support that.
Yeah, and I think even when we go back to the whale conversation, it's so funny we're calling it whales because, you know, I used to actually like be part of building whales, like sculptural whales. So it was always a funny when we talked about, you know, whales, dolphins, things like that in a way of business. But so back to the whales, you know, Tim, you talked about falling out of your funnel. So even from a perspective of the how to get those 7 whales, like we were talking about actually getting the 7 whales, not having 7 whales in your funnel. So maybe it's an opportunity for you to talk about, like, a healthy funnel is usually like 3 times. So you have like 21 whales in your funnel. And how many conversations are you having with those 21 whales as they progress, you know, meaningful conversations until an opportunity actually converts or comes out of those 7 whales. So I don't know if it's to talk about that, because that is also something that isn't considered. You just think about, this is our $2 million growth, but you think about all of the things that happen before that to just convert that is pretty massive. And this is just, you know, the way my brain works of, you know, break it down into small pieces, and then it puts things in perspective a little bit.
So the industry numbers that I've seen are a 20% win rate if you're fully prepared and done all your work on the deals. So it's actually 5 times if you're really, really good. One of the things that I stress, just as an aside here, sometimes if your win rate is so high, are you really chasing everything that you could? Or are you playing with the numbers? So I kind of look for that win rate that just is healthy. Do you have a good set of opportunities that are coming in that meet our revenue goals that we can go chase? And you're absolutely right. You need to have a multiple of your goal in that sales funnel. That's why it takes a new sales rep in a new industry or a new company, if they're not bringing a book of business from somewhere else and converting it over, takes some time to build up that sales funnel and get to that fully functioning role. So having your ideal client profile and knowing what they are, you can help accelerate that, because you can say, here are the companies that need our service, they fit our ICP, we can go after them, and you can accelerate that funnel development. But if they're just starting from zero, it takes time to build that up. And that's really important to what we said. If we're going to, like Tracy was just saying, double our revenue, we'll just add in a salesperson and do it this year.
Boom, no problem.
Mic drop.
And I think that the foundation
You
of
need
data,
you need to have a number of things.
It's on you, Tim.
yeah.
It's breaking up a bit for me here.
Uh-oh.
You go ahead.
I've lost my train of thought here. I think that the foundation of data, I think, from even what Tim has mentioned, is the other important or another important element in terms of some of this goal setting. I think the revenue will spark the conversations, but understanding the underlying kind of data foundation and kind of what data exists to be able to support those growth goals is also super important, and goes across the whole business. The examples that Tim shared around, what is our actual cost of acquiring a customer from a sales perspective? What's the actual effort that goes into it? From an like every single person around this virtual call table, kind of whatever we want to call it, has some sort of metrics that can amplify their decision making. And I think that the other piece that this probably exposes, if people start having the conversation a layer deeper than just the revenue, is what is the data that supports the actual things that we're going to need to get there, and actually spending some time to put in place that foundation first is going to be a really key step to actually setting some of those meaningful and reasonable goals on a long-term basis.
I'm just going to echo that a little bit from the, like, I'm using air quotes again, marketing data side, because there's a lot of nonsense data that floats around marketing that people use for decision making that they really shouldn't use for decision making, because data that's collected just because it's easy to collect isn't fed by your purpose. What am I trying to do with my marketing? What kind of conversations am I trying to start? What kind of brand am I trying to build? Like, the number of engagements you get on a post doesn't tell you any of that information. And so there's a lot of things, and there's probably equal amounts in other departments, but like in marketing in particular, there's a lot of data, quote unquote, that is tracked that is not relevant to setting good goals. And it can be like super distracting. So something to watch out for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important with this goal setting is what does all this add up to, right? So the number of likes on an Instagram post doesn't necessarily drive revenue, but if you put that above against a bunch of other things, that I have a bunch of incoming leads, I'm having sales going, and I can kind of draw this line, if there's something to tell the story, then it's valuable, but it's making sure that's all connected. How does this relate to revenue? How does that process happen? If I'm not thinking that through, and I'm just putting wonderful pictures of whales on an Instagram post, then I get lots of likes, but that doesn't drive my revenue necessarily, right? So it's just making sure that's all connected. So in isolation, I agree. That doesn't tell you much. In combination with other factors in a plan, you can start to say, yes, we're having success because we're doing X. We need to do more of it.
And I'll just throw on my data nerd hat for 2 seconds, but I like correlation isn't necessarily causation either.
Yes.
In your example, if I'm putting up a bunch of pictures of whales on my LinkedIn and those are taken off and my business is also growing, like they might not actually be connected. So I think finding some of those data points is super important, although people do love pictures of whales.
But also, like, what are the things about pictures? Let's just keep going with pictures of whales because this is what we're going to talk about now. Like, there's part of that. Like, there's a guy that I know who's like an underwater photographer. When he posts pictures of whales, there's like a brand component. And while it's like a personal side of his brand, there's like a connection point. A lot of times when we do those types of things, we'll say like, oh, cat videos, or actually, let's just use videos as an example, because for quite some time, LinkedIn has been highlighting videos, right? The LinkedIn algorithm likes videos. So then people do video related things, but there's a million different ways to do video. And there's video that people do that is engaging because the way the person is doing it, they are engaged, right? And there's a way to do video that is like completely disengaged, right? I did a video to do a video and now I posted a video. And so again, like while all of those activities have data that is relevant to the success of the program, but to like pull it back, one of the things Vered mentioned at the beginning was about like how revenue is an output, right? But like engagement is a result of inputs, right? What are my inputs? And am I only looking at like the volume of inputs? Am I looking at the quality of inputs? If quality is a staple for my business, what does that look like? What does it look like for me to create? I'll just use myself as an example again, right? If authenticity is a value of mine, what does it look like for me to create from an authenticity point of view? How do I put myself into the vibe of authenticity? How does that result in different business results than like quote unquote just doing a post? So yes, lots of data. and when we are tracking the data to the right things that are meaningful for the business, then that can create meaningful data.
And how often do we get caught up in when we're chasing these big goals and there isn't really like an intention behind it and not done in a meaningful way and not broken down? And yes, we ring the bell 7 times. In your guys' experience, because we've all been, in business for a long time, like working, in professional ways, corporate or otherwise, how often is it not what we can actually do? And I get that. Like there is some like we'll figure it out way, but people get addicted to that building and flying the plane at the same time. There's going to be part of that. You're not going to know it all. But like, come on, like you better have an idea of how you're going to fulfill on this promise. Like you can't be completely out of left field. And you need to listen to all your stakeholders, right? Like if you go to your team and I, as your operations person, say, there's no way I can scale up our team that fast during, like a time where, skilled labor is at an all-time shortage. We don't have roles and responsibilities. We don't have documented processes. We don't have an employee handbook. I have, leaders that aren't the best people managers, that we're having trouble with accountability. But yeah, you know what, Tim? You get that top sales guy and you ring that bell 7 times. Like, you won't ring them again next year 7 times. I can tell you that much. So if you're getting a lot of hesitation from the other stakeholders in the room around achieving that, it's definitely worth talking about.
I think you're bringing up a really good point, because there's like internal things that you can control. And then there's external stuff. So even, thinking about the market right now, we have manufacturing firms, construction firms that are kind of like, well, I don't know what's going to happen with these tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
We've delayed a little bit now, but still, I mean, you could be doing everything right internally, and you have these external factors that could affect your revenue targets. So, there's only so much that is within your control. And so are we, by setting revenue as a goal, are we setting ourselves up for disappointment and the thinking that we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater because none of it worked, but only really 50% of it was in our control?
I think the important thing here is setting an organizational goal is kind of like sales. You have to sell the goal internally. So part of that is to what Lindsay just said a second ago, is finding out all those kind of things that are going on. So a CEO that's sitting in a glass tower in Calgary, setting a revenue target without walking the sites and finding out what's happening on the ground to some degree, he doesn't have the full perspective of the challenges up there. So then when you're having those conversations, you can at least say at the high level, here's the plan. We're going to do these things. And you heard some of those concerns. You heard some of those issues. They're starting to sell it. But it also comes to a point where those senior leaders can only go so far without having the details of those people come in. Here's what we're going to do. We've incorporated some of your input. Now I need you to participate in building that plane as we fly. Because the leader can't have all the details figured out. That's why we have a team. That's why we have people there. And to your point, Lindsay, that engagement starts before you set the goal and after you set the goal, so that you've started to build some of those components in the plan. And like I just said, it's like you're selling the goal internally. And so collecting those different viewpoints and perspectives, so you can show that we have an understanding of what's really going on, but we still have aggressive goals that we want to achieve.
And I think because it's it is an outcome and a lagging indicator, you still need to track. It needs to be on a scorecard. You need to be aware of how you're doing on this. So it's the conversation starter, but it's the thing you come back to, each week, each month, quarter, revisit, because it is the easiest thing to measure. At the end of the day, right? Like where it comes from or whatever, you can deep dive into it, but that's why. And I can't remember, I think it was Tracy. People do that people, you talked about posts or engagement or something like that, clicks or likes is the easiest thing to measure. So that's why people walk in, like human nature. We like the easy roads, even though we're actually making it harder for ourselves. But it's the same thing with revenue. It is the easiest thing to measure. That is why often it's like, oh, I'm going to do this. I was $1 million. I want to be 3 million. I'll just, watch my sales and revenues and things like that every single month or week. But so you can measure it, but there needs to be all the other work done after the fact.
And sales is still a lagging indicator. It's still something in the rear view mirror. So what am I doing to look ahead to drive some of that, right? So what are the incoming leads? What's the sales funnel look like? What are those things that we're doing to generate that revenue in the future? With some leading indicators need to be part of that scorecard. Aaron's got a really good comment here, Tracy, if you can bring it up, but he's talking about cascading goals. Absolutely. I don't give the $400 million revenue target to the junior salesperson that's screening leads coming in. I break it down to how they support that and how do they make sure that they're getting good qualified leads to the next team. And that's what their goals are about. So they're supporting it and doing that throughout the organization, like Aaron just said.
And Aaron's comment actually had made me have a tiny bit of aha here as well around maybe the reason that people lean on revenue goals is because, I've seen so many organizations go through goal setting where they'll come back and they'll have really distinct goals for operations, really distinct goals for marketing, really distinct goals for HR and sales. And they have 6 different sets of goals that are all really good and they all move the organization forward, but they don't connect. And I think that revenue is one thing that is really easy to look at and say, here's something that touches every single facet of the organization that we can all rally around. And so I feel like it's a little bit of that cop-out sometimes where if they're not quite sure what that final goal is that everything can roll up to, we'll just have it be revenue. And so I think that the ability to replace that revenue goal with something that the whole organization can rally around and that each of the different functional areas can then look to and tie their goals to is a really important step that, and I do think revenue is a little bit of a cop-out on that front.
Well, and I think I want to come back to we use this analogy in a lot of episodes, building the plane and flying it at the same time. I think there's an interesting concept here too of is that our goal? Is our goal to continually fly a plane that we're also building? Or is our goal knowing that nothing is certain and there's external factors and there's always going to be tweaks to a plane, but if you're Boeing, maybe Boeing's a bad example, if you're actually building planes, I'm pretty sure your goal is to create a plane that flies, right? Not to constantly be building the planes. Maybe we're not always executing on that goal, but I'm pretty sure that's the goal. And so if we looked at that from a business perspective and we said, what does it look like for us to build our plane? Right. And maybe right now we're in the mode of building the plane while we still are flying it, which is fine because we want to make revenue while we're building. But at the same time, I've been part of organizations where it felt like we were chasing every dollar. And so if you were actually going to pull that back into an airplane analogy, I would say that's not operating with the goal of building our plane to the point where we can fly a plane, right? That's a culture of constantly building the plane while we're flying it. And so if we can have that level of vulnerability and transparency in the leadership conversations, we are setting these high level goals, then I think we can also actually start to get to the answer. What does it look like for us to have a plane? And that doesn't mean that sometimes the landing gear isn't going to get stuck, or sometimes we catch really bad winds and it slows us down, right? It doesn't mean that all of the things are going to be perfect, but our goal is to build our plane. And from a branding point of view, this is really something that I'm very passionate about. Is what is your plane? How is it different than another person's planes? There's multiple companies in the world building planes. From the outside, they might look very similar, but then I like fly on WestJet and can't understand why they can't just put a TV in the seat anymore. And like, anyway, but this is the purpose, that why is the brand experience. How do you want to do this? And how are we doing that? How are we building our plane? How does that revenue contribute to the building of that? Or are we just constantly chasing new plane designs?
Tracy, I just want to echo what Abdul has said about the mic drop on your statement. I just realized how absolutely ridiculous that statement is, building and flying the plane at the same time. And maybe that's the point. Like, you would never do, no one's going to get on a plane that's still being built, unless they have no other choice. Like,
but we do it all the time. And it's not because but we don't. There's a lot of companies that are doing lots of things. And I'm not saying they're not serving clients well and that type of thing, but they have no idea what kind of plane they're trying to build.
But that's the key, right? Like, are you building the Dreamliner, or are you building, like a WestJet plane that's going to Vancouver that, you're using your phone to watch a show on? Like, there is a difference. And being super clear about that, and even doing it in a sustainable way of, okay, so instead of doubling our top, our revenues, our sales, or our company targets, what can we do in an intentional way to grow? Because that's what it's all about. Fundamentally, right? We're all trying to grow. That is the intention of that growth. Whether it's revenue, whether it's profit, whether it's, head count, impact, it's about growth, being better, maybe serving more. So, by building and flying the plane at the same time, are you growing?
And that's part of the challenge of an organization, right? Is you want to grow. You also have your employees and your customers who need some predictability in what you do and how they do it and how customers interact with your organization. So constantly living on this plane that is being built is exhausting. And you can fly a plane without seats. I'm not sure you want to fly it without a landing gear. So there's also some of that perspective too, of what exactly are we building while we're flying it, because some things you can do that just fine. Some things it's not even going to get off the ground without wings. But you need to just be aware that we can't be constantly doing that, because you'll start to lose people. They'll just be unclear of their job, customers be unsure of the experience. And so having that push and pull of growth and some predictability is really important when you're setting these goals.
All right, friends, we're coming up on the hour. Does anybody have any last minute golden nuggets they want to drop? We dropped a lot. I think, and the overarching theme for me today was just that a solo goal, regardless of whether it's revenue or something else, if it's not going to cascade through the organization and be tied to some kind of how, as well as like the knowledge of the people internally feeling like they can execute on those things, probably not going to just magically appear for you. And so there's creation that has to happen. There's not just like, I create the goal and that's it. I'm done with my creation here. Like, I got to create a way to reach that goal, because I have never reached that goal before. So I have to figure out how I reach that goal. And we have to figure out, going from the I to the we. Yeah. One person, even when we look at some of these big companies like Apple and we attribute the business to the CEO, at the end of the day, and most of the CEOs even say this very openly, right? It's like, this is not a me thing. Without all of us, this would not exist. This is a we thing. And if I would call this out too, because if you're watching this episode and you feel like you don't have a we to have these kinds of conversations with, this is something that like a fractional resource is very useful for, to ask these types of questions, to dig into how does revenue manifest in these different areas. So make sure you have a conversation partner that can allow you, that can just probe a little deeper. So you don't have to build your plane while you're constantly flying it. All right, friends, that's it for another gathering of the Fractional Forum. We'll be back here, same time, same place, every Wednesday. So come and check us out, share it with your friends. We have the past episodes on our YouTube channel, so you can go there and check out the Fractional Forum. You will find all of that there. And if you are interested in being on the show, or if you have like a business challenge or something you would like the Fractional Forum brains to deep dive into, we are always open to exploring those types of things. So connect with one or all of us. We would welcome that. And until